So what's quality all about? I would insist that the difference between success and failure is, first of all, having a good business model, but the second is to concentrate on quality. If you don't deliver a quality proposition, you're not going to be in business very long. So how do we define quality? There are various definitions I've picked up over the years. The supply of goods that do not come back to customers who do come back. That's a good one. The extent of correspondence between expectation and realization. The match between what you want and what you get. The achievement of consistency and the elimination of unwanted surprises. Actually, quality is what you consider it to be. And what your idea of a quality beer is, and what my idea of a quality beer is, do not necessarily coincide. And something I feel very strongly about in the world of beer is there shouldn't be people telling you what's good and what's bad. You decide what's good and what's bad. In this course, we've talked about things like the staling of beer. There's a lot of stale beer drunk around the world, and sometimes it's what people are used to. And if you get rid of the stale character, they're not very happy. So it really is a personal decision. Some people love sour beers. I'm okay with sour beers, but I don't want too much. Some people love smoky beers, the Rauch beers. I'm not personally a big fan of those. I love black IPAs. I like gently flavored Pilsners. I like Bocks. I like IPAs. In fact, the longer I've lived in America, the more I've loved IPAs. But what I do want is consistency. What I do want is to have a beer that I purchase and with an expectation, and I think, well, this is good. I like that brand. And I want to have that beer, when I pour it out, I want it to have the color I expect, the foam I expect, the clarity I expect, and the flavor I expect. I don't want to be shocked. I remember somebody once sent me an email and said, you keep talking about consistency. I like surprises. And I said, well, you take your car onto to the gas station, and you fill it with gas, and your car won't start again. Are you happy with that surprise? Or if you have an anesthetic because you're having some surgery and it doesn't work, are you happy with that surprise? Think of anything in life. Think of any product that you buy. You buy it with certain expectations and you expect them to be realized. And I feel it should be the same way about beer. We never talk about vintage in beer. The nearest we get to it is the storage of stronger beers, maybe in barrels, maybe in bottles. Some of the barley wines, for example, or the imperial stouts. And that's okay. But we don't talk about vintage. You don't say, 1993 was a really good year for Bass Mild. Because by now it's not going to be quite as good as it was then. You never hear of a brewer, the owner of a company. I remember the scion of a major American brewing company turning up. He would turn up at one of his breweries somewhere out west, out in California. And if he wasn't very happy with the beer, they couldn't say things like, yeah, but it wasn't such a good year for hops. Every year has got to be a good year for hops. But you would think of barley is going to depend on where it's grown, on what season it's grown in. It's going to change year to year. And the maltster and the brewer overcome those differences to achieve a consistent product year after year. And the same with hops, and of course they have to look after the water and the yeast. So how do brewers achieve this consistency? And the first thing you've got to have is commitment from the top. I remember when I was with the Bass Company, the chairman of the company was called Robin Manners. And he said to me, Charlie, there are two things that matter to our company. The first is the people, and the second is the quality. And if you look after the people, they will ensure the quality. If you make sure those people are capable of doing their job, trained to do their job, aware of what they need to do, aware of their role in the organization, then you stand a very, very good chance of having a quality proposition. So let's talk to Brian Grossman. Brian is the son of the legendary founder of the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, Ken Grossman. Let's talk to Brian about the company commitment to quality. So here we are at Mills River, Sierra Nevada, and I'm with Brian Grossman. Brian.
Charlie.
What's your role?
Try not to get everyone's way. I'm a very proud second generation brewer here. My father started our company almost 40 years ago on November 15th, 1980. I was negative 5 years old.
Wow.
I was born in 85 to a lucky, I guess a lucky family that makes beer for a living.
Well, I read the story, I know the story, and it's an amazing one. You're one of the board members. It's entirely family owned?
Yeah, my father started the company with a partner, Paul Camuzzi, back in the early days. My father started as a homebrew supply shop owner, and Paul was one of his early clients. They started the brewery in 1980, and then in about 95, 96 timeline, the partnership ended, and my family became the sole owners of Sierra Nevada. So it's my mother, my father, my sister Sierra, good name, and myself are the acting board members. And I have another sister, Carrie, who's currently not in the business.
And Sierra was named Sierra before the brewery, yeah?
Sierra and the brewery were named after my father's love of the mountain range of Sierra Nevada, so it's his favorite place to go.
Right. So, the brewery started off in Chico, and you basically expanded into Mills River, North Carolina. When did that happen?
Yeah, when we were looking at the writing on the wall, it was about 2009 timeline when we sort of knew we needed to do something. We were going to hit capacity in our Chico facility, and we had basically three options. Option one was to sell the company and let someone else deal with the decision, which we really didn't want to do. Option two was to expand in California. And option three was to expand east. Both expanding in California or going east had challenges. Expanding in California would have been great. It would have kept the family together, but we do have to ship beer across the nation, and liquid beer in our case is heavy. It takes a lot of resources to ship across the U.S., and environmental efficacy is one of our foundational decisions that we try to do. So we made the decision to put a brewery on the East Coast for both beer freshness and quality, as well as the environmental impacts that we would save.
So, something like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is brewed in Chico,
Yep.
And it's brewed in Mills River. Presumably the goal is to make sure it tastes the same wherever it comes from, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Flavor alignment is something that took us a very, very long time to achieve. The largest ingredient in beer is obviously water, and the water here is very, very soft. It's about 30 parts per million of total hardness. And matching the water that we have in California took a bit of effort. We actually have to add a bit of chemistry to our water here to get the waters aligned. Right. And we're actually not using a unified supply of grain or hops. So we try to do our best to keep them aligned, but we don't. So it's a constant challenge, and we constantly are shipping beers back and forth to make sure that all of our beers taste the same regardless of where they're brewed.
So I think in terms of the products you put out, they're primarily beer. There's a lot of other brewing companies that are going in other directions with flavored alcoholic beverages, shall we say, or whatever, but you're pretty much hardcore beer.
We're very passionate about the beers that we make, but there is a world out there to explore, and I've always learned never say never with anything. But regardless of the industry that we get in, it would be to our standards, the Sierra Nevada standards.
Right. Well, hearing you say that puts me in mind of when I listen to the public radio in California, and I hear mention of Sierra Nevada sponsoring the programs, and family owned, family argued over. Is there a lot of arguing going on?
We actually argued over putting that on the label as well. No, that's one of the greatest things about a family company is that regardless of what we're talking about, everyone's intentions are pure, and it's for the best movement forward. Right. And we might have different perspectives on things. So yes, there's there is some discussion over what we're doing and why we're doing it, but you always have to sort of sit back and realize that, okay, this other person's truly trying to help for the long term.
Right. Now, we mentioned the environment earlier on. I know that's key to what you do. Could you say something about the sorts of things you do to look after the environment?
Yeah, so I'm probably going to say something a little bit controversial. Making beer requires an awful lot of inputs, of growing of barley, of growing of hops, of mining of aluminum ore, of making the glass bottle. All these transportation, all these things require a lot of environmental impact. So we feel we have the responsibility to constantly try to minimize our impact on the environment. And anyone that sort of sits back and thinks what they're doing is good is missing the point. I mean, you should constantly be pushing forward. So we do a variety of things from both just sustainability as well as quality-centric things. So we recover all of our own CO2 on site, and that does a few things. One, it makes us not have to purchase beverage-grade CO2, which is great for the environment, as well as there's a quality standard that we get with our own CO2 that you don't achieve when you purchase CO2. Can is a great package. We've really embraced the aluminum can. You get 100 cases on a pallet versus 70 cases on a pallet, and you can get a lot more pallets on a truck. We do on-site energy generation as much as we possibly can. We've got over 10,000 solar panels, and we've got a variety of microturbines on site as well that are running off of our own methane that is produced by our own on-site wastewater treatment.
Right.
We've got what's called a hot rock composter, where we can actually digest 2 tons of organic material a day in it, and you get a ton of organic compost at the end of it. About a 14-day cycle. It's a constant feed cycle.
That's really rapid. I mean, composting normally takes months.
Yeah, it's a pretty fun thing, but we're always just trying to use the best technology. Water's a big one here as well.
Right.
It takes, most breweries are running anywhere between 5 to 1 or so in a ratio, so 5 gallons of water in for 1 gallon of beer out. We try to run our breweries at under 3. So
that's remarkable.
We try to do our best with everything that we do.
And I think you used to have your spent grains going to cattle, and that made its way back in the form of burgers and steaks.
Yeah, absolutely. We do sell our spent grain for cattle feed or pig feed, depending upon where you're at. And we had a small agriculture program where we were having the university raise our own cattle for our restaurants off of our spent grain. So,
so Brian, at the university we had in the small brewery we had there, we had something called a LEED certification. I think you embraced that as well, but probably on a much bigger scale.
Yeah, it's LEED is a building program speaking about energy and environmental design, and there's different levels of the certification that you can get. There's a LEED certified silver, gold, and then the highest would be platinum. And depending upon the points that are assigned to your project, you would qualify for one of these levels. We sat out with the goal to be actually LEED platinum during this process. And it was the construction, the building, and the engineering were all 3 certified platinum, and it was quite a endeavor for us to do. We actually had to rework the energy models a few different times because we have a lot of active redundancies built into our system.
And the thing that impresses me is that there are some brewing companies, and they will remain nameless, that actually almost use the environmental things as a sales tool, and they market on the basis of the environment. You don't do that. You actually do it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, people don't necessarily always want things pushed at them. Right. And when you have the information available and the drinker, the consumer can actually go find it themselves, they feel it's a little bit more of an honest connection. And we don't do it because it's cool or an advertisement. We do it because we've always had to do it. We've always wanted to do it.
All right, Brian, so I've got a lot to say in this course about what I believe a great beer is. In your opinion, what goes into making a great beer?
The number one thing, in my opinion, that makes a great beer is sanitation. You've got to get your breweries as clean as you possibly can because of all these little microbes. They all have different changes on flavor. And we can argue about the hop varietals and the amount of IBUs and the types of grains up and down. And that's sort of the fun part about brewing beer. It's the chefs talking about seasonings and what's right and wrong. But when you overcook a dish, or you didn't clean the pan, or in our case, you didn't clean your equipment, and you get these off flavors, that's where it's unacceptable. But every great beer should be drank out of a glass.
Thank you, Brian. So people are really important. They have to be trained. They have to know what they're doing. They have to follow protocols. We have to have measurements. We have to know the properties of the malt, the analysis on the malt. We need to know the analysis on the hops. We need to know that the water is okay. We need to make sure the yeast is alive and healthy and is put in to the brew in the correct amount. So we have to make measurements, and we have to have standard operating procedures. But it will be make or break depending on the skill and the aptitude of the people that are involved. Now let's turn to the Quality Assurance Manager of the Sierra Nevada Brewing Company in Mills River, Liz Huber. So here at Mills River, brewery of Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, I'm with Liz Huber. So Liz, what do you do for this company?
I'm the Quality Assurance Manager at the Mills River Brewery.
So what does a Quality Assurance QA Manager actually do?
Yeah, so we're responsible for a team of people that are highly engaged in making sure that our product quality meets and exceeds our own expectations, but also the expectations of our customers.
So is that all about making measurements, or is it systems? What is it?
All. So we have areas where we're measuring explicitly what's happening with the beer, but then we're also looking at analytics. So we're bubbling things up to see trends. We'll look at not just what's happening with the beer, but what's also happening with the packaging, what's happening with our draft systems,
right,
and also sensory and even consumer quality.
So Liz, what was the journey that brought you to Sierra Nevada? Where did it all come from?
Yeah, so I went to school for engineering, and I worked at various large corporations in research and development, and really found my niche in operations. And I did an operations startup at another large company for wet processing, and decided beer's really cool. Sierra Nevada's an amazing company with amazing values, and I said, I think I might want to try to work there.
So in terms of checking things, you're checking things right the way through, from start to finish.
Yes.
Raw materials,
yes,
right the way through to the beer about to go out of the warehouse.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And actually, even once the beer is in the warehouse, we're still checking it. And we even have measurements where we will look over time, how is the beer aging? Is it performing as we would expect?
So you're pulling samples of beer back from trade and checking it to make sure it's in good
We actually
condition?
maintain a beer library. So we keep samples of our beer for even slightly past the duration of the shelf life.
Right.
And sometimes we'll do spot checks on that, but we'll also do routine as part of our standard work,
right,
checks for sensory. So we'll sometimes do age, rate, and rank and see how the product is aging out.
Okay. So in terms of some of the things you would measure on the beer itself,
Sure.
What sort of things are you measuring?
So it depends where we are in the process,
Right.
but for the most part, early in the process, we're looking at sugar levels, we're looking at pH, and we're also very closely monitoring the yeast. Throughout the fermentation process, we're still looking at those same characteristics, but we're also looking to see if we're getting what we would expect in terms of CO2, in terms of ABV, and also monitoring to make sure that we're not producing any undesirable off flavors. So probably one of the things that we do more than I've seen others is our sensory program, and our trained panel for sensory is, it's top notch.
So when you're talking about a trained panel, what you're doing is people learn about different flavors, how to recognize different flavors,
Exactly.
how to score different flavors.
Exactly. So it's almost the same as when you were a youngster and you learned to identify the color red or the smell of a rose, right? So we do the same thing for our sensory panel. They're highly trained, and they probably can even tell you not just what a hop character difference might be between two different brands, but they could rate it on a scale. and tell you the different characteristics. So you might have a hop character that's more tropical versus one that's more pine or resinous on the nose.
Right. Presumably it's quite straightforward to recruit people to taste beer, is it?
Presumably. However, you have to have a discerning palate,
Yes,
right?
of course.
So if you, for example, do have a discerning palate, you'd be a great candidate for a descriptive panel.
Right.
That's the panel that's going to identify, there's more intensity in this hop, and I can describe what that difference in intensity is.
Right. Of course, you've got a big brewery in Chico and you've got a big brewery in North Carolina.
Yeah.
The sensory work presumably is very important to make sure there's good consistency between the two.
That's right.
How does that work?
So weekly we meet and we call it our flavor profile alignment. We ship beers across the country to both sites and we video conference one another and we blindly taste two of the same beer from different facilities. And sometimes we'll trick people and it'll be both from the same facility, right?
Oh.
Because you gotta keep people on their toes.
Yeah.
But that's the process of confirming that our product tastes the same from facility to facility because we want the experience of a Sierra Nevada beer to be the same regardless of where you buy it.
Right. Now, another thing that's true about beer is that it's relatively resistant to spoilage. So it's relatively resistant to bacteria growing in it because of the alcohol, because of the bitter substances, but it's not entirely so. So presumably you do quite a lot of microbiological checks.
We absolutely do a lot of microbiological checks. So we have a microbiologist on site who's pretty much checking everything.
Right.
And this is a perfect space to talk about the difference between quality control and quality assurance.
Right.
Because the quality team is not policing this. It's the folks in brewing, it's the folks in packaging, and even folks on our brewery support team and sanitation that are accountable for quality at that point, because quality is everybody's job.
Right.
And so our micro team is swabbing, plating, and doing PCR.
That's polymerase chain reaction.
That's exactly what that is. So we're saying not just can something grow in ideal conditions, but also let's find even trace DNA levels. And I think our PCR does 30 plus different specific beer spoilers. So do we have any DNA that we can grow up and identify what is that? Where did we get it from? And then we'll work with the production teams to just get rid of it.
Right. So there'll be people listening to this who will be home brewers. Do the same considerations apply in terms of quality if you're brewing in a bucket at home as in big brewery like this one?
Yeah. Fundamentally, I would say absolutely. Comes back to hygiene, right? I wouldn't expect them to have a beer analyzer or an alkalizer of some type or, the fancy equipment that we might, but there are certainly rudimentary ways that you can still ensure you are producing top-notch quality beer.
Which reminds me that when I say to people, your most important laboratory is traveling around with you. It's your eyes, it's your nose,
That's
it's
true.
your taste.
Yeah.
Even what you can hear,
Yeah.
in a brewery like this, you're listening to pumps and things like that.
That's right.
So it's very much applying one's senses and sense, I guess, to make sure you get a common sense product at the end of the day.
Yes, you would throw a good pun in there, wouldn't you?
I would do, really.